that in order to win, Israel and America has to win in a way that every teenager in the free world will see it. It means something like Venezuela to Trump and something like the 6 Days War for Israel. But to the Iranian, and in a similar way to Hezbollah and Hamas, it's enough to survive. It's an asymmetric war. If they survive, they had won. If after several weeks or months of a war, they can still stand up and keep fighting, that means that they've won in their own eyes, but also in the eyes of the world community, in the eyes of the region, in the eyes of history in a way.
When Western media covers the destruction in Gaza or the escalating violence across the Middle East, the standard line from establishment defenders is always the same. If you criticize Israel's actions, you're just biased. Well, today, that shield collapses completely. Because on Piers Morgan Uncensored, not one, but two former prime ministers of Israel, Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak, just went on international television and tore Benjamin Netanyahu's regime to shreds. We are talking about Ehud Olmert openly stating that sitting cabinet ministers are calling for genocide in Gaza, while state police and military forces actively protect violent settler rampages in the West Bank. And then Ehud Barak stepping up to expose how Netanyahu tricked Donald Trump into a reckless Iran war with zero post-strike strategy. If you believe in facts over propaganda, hit that subscribe button right now. I'm Neel. This is The Honest Perspective. The receipts are coming directly from inside the Israeli establishment, and they cannot be unsaid. Let's get into it.
Well, I certainly can add to this. I think that he has declared war on the state of Israel and on the people of Israel, on the basic fundamental values which have characterized what Israel was and the way that Israel was perceived in the international community, even at times that the many different parts of the world didn't agree with us, criticized Israel, but there never was such a storm of protest across the world in the friendliest places that were so much connected to the state of Israel as it is now. And this is largely, almost entirely, because of the fascistic, chauvinistic, extremist, Ayatollah type character of the major part of the government with the complete consent of and inspiration of the Prime Minister of Israel. I know that lots of good, innocent people and Jews across the world complain about the growing wave of anti-Semitism. And certainly there is anti-Semitism. There was anti-Semitism throughout our history, throughout our lives. We all were victims of it. But 5 years ago, or 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, when I was fighting at the time that I was Prime Minister with Lebanon, there was a certain criticism. There were some voices of discontent, but there was not anything similar to what it is today. And there was anti-Semitism also then, but there was not any such voice of hatred to the state of Israel. And the only reason for it is when you look at this government, what can you say? When you see this Ben-Gvir running the Israeli government and talking about the Gaza to get rid of everyone there because everyone is Hamas and everyone who is Hamas is doomed to die. And everyone in Gaza is Hamas. And the obvious interpretation of it is that he calls for a genocide of these people. And what the settlers are doing in the West Bank without the Israeli police stopping it, in fact, in some cases supporting it. And the Israeli army is indifferent or sometimes actively supporting it. And this is obnoxious, totally intolerable and unacceptable and unforgivable. And it is all done under the auspices and the responsibility of the Israeli government. So what do you want people outside of Israel to think? I can't tolerate it, and I'm an Israeli, and I live here.
Pause the tape right there. That is Ehud Olmert, the former Prime Minister of Israel from 2006 to 2009, explicitly stating that when National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir says everyone in Gaza is Hamas and doomed to die, the obvious interpretation is that he calls for a genocide. Olmert didn't stop there. He explicitly pointed out that Israeli police and the IDF are actively supporting or turning a blind eye to armed settler attacks in the West Bank, calling it obnoxious, totally intolerable, and unforgivable. Notice how Piers Morgan didn't even push back, because how can you push back when the former head of the Israeli state is telling you directly what's happening on the ground? But wait until you see how former Prime Minister Ehud Barak dismantles Netanyahu's foreign policy and his military gambit with Donald Trump in Iran. Watch this.
The attack, the 12-day attack last year in June 25 was in a way justifiable blow to their nuclear military plant, to their missile industry and so on. Not obliterated, not pushing them backward for generations as Netanyahu and Trump try to exaggerate the result, but it was, let's say, give and take, it was justifiable. The new attack this February of 28th of February 26, is an absolute failure. It was based, the whole idea was based on fantasy, that by eliminating a single person, or probably half a dozen of leaders, Khamenei and his entourage, and some other illusions, you can topple down a regime. The idea, without admitting it publicly, was to topple down the regime, but any professional would have told you that it's not going to work. And it's not, I'm not saying it in retrospect. Many people in the room said it, both here and in Washington, and Netanyahu insisted on doing it. He succeeded to convince Trump, against the judgment of both J.D. Vance, Rubio, and many professionals, I assume, on the CIA or NSC and so on. And when it started, the fantasies kind of blown up, exaggerating, and collapsed immediately. And there was misreading of how kind of stable is this regime. There is no understanding of the reason that in order to win, Israel and America has to win in a way that every teenager in the free world will see it. It means something like Venezuela to Trump and something like the 6 Days War for Israel. But to the Iranian, and in the similar way to Hezbollah and Hamas, it's enough to survive. It's an asymmetric war. If they survive, they had won. If after several weeks or months of a war, they can still stand up and keep fighting, that means that they've won in their own eyes, but also in the eyes of the world community, in the eyes of the region, in the eyes of history in a way. So that's something that should not have been missed by anyone who is serious strategist in this region. And not to mention the fact that that everyone should realize in advance that the first step that they will do is to close the Hormuz Strait. There was not a single war game in any capital in the world around the issue of Iran in the last generation where the next or second step of the Iranian side in the war game was to close the Hormuz Straits. The idea that it was not considered as something that will inevitably happen and will be needed to give answer to is I don't know how to call it, a total clumsiness on the strategic level.
Think about what Ehud Barak just exposed. He revealed that Netanyahu dragged Donald Trump into an aggressive regional war based on pure fantasy, believing that decapitating a few top leaders would magically trigger a spontaneous internal revolution. Barak highlights the complete strategic incompetence. They failed to prepare for the immediate closing of the Strait of Hormuz, something every standard military war game predicts as step one. Now, pay close attention to this final stretch, where Barak breaks down the fundamental economic and military law that Netanyahu completely ignored, the law of diminishing returns in asymmetric warfare.
And then the idea that the Kurds will be encouraged to cross the border from Iraq to Iran and move toward Tehran. You know, it's ridiculous. There are 300 miles from the place where the Iraqi Kurds would meet the Iranian Kurds, and along these 300 miles to Tehran, there are about 1 million armed people who back the regime. How the hell you can even dream that it will work? And the ridiculous idea that leaders from the West, the leader of the great Satan and the leader of the little Satan, could call upon the Iranian people to stand up and take their destiny in their hands is also ridiculous. Try to imagine what would have happened if Khamenei, the dead one, would have come on TV and call upon Israelis to topple down Netanyahu because he tries to destroy democracy in Israel. It will unite even the protest against Netanyahu behind him. And the same happens in Iran. So you cannot explain it only by the theory of a gambler that failed and tried to double down on his gamble in order to save the case. No justification for the failure of Netanyahu. Netanyahu misses the very way that military campaigns are run. You have to have a clear objective. They should be achievable. You should have the means to execute them. You should have the political will to stand up the ups and downs of a real war. And you should have a vision of how you're going to translate your achievements in the battlefield into sustainable political diplomatic results. This political diplomatic leg is essential for any war. And they should know, both in Jerusalem and Washington, that a war, especially war that you initiate, has always to follow the rule from macroeconomy of diminishing returns. The first day is dramatic. Everyone gets happy and applauds. Then you have 1 or 2 days more when you can deepen the damage. Then comes the time of diminishing returns. And later on, you find yourself muddling through and sinking into the mud of a war. America had it in Vietnam, they had it in Iraq, they had it in Afghanistan. We had it a generation ago or 2 generations ago in the attrition war with Egypt and Syria. That's the rules, and they should have been clear. No way to explain it. It's a major failure, and in Israel at least, the Prime Minister and his government should be accountable and be removed from power, even independent of the attempt to destroy democracy, which started, I should admit, before the war. So it's much more crazy than I thought. You cannot just relate it to the fact that there is a war, and as a result of the dire straits they got into, they raised this idea of dictatorship. They had it when they started the government 9 months before the war started.
What we just witnessed across those 3 clips isn't just spicy debate television. It is the complete moral and strategic collapse of the official narrative surrounding Netanyahu's government, documented directly by the very men who used to run the Israeli state. Let's look at the receipts, because what Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak admitted on tape aligns precisely with what independent international bodies and human rights organizations have been reporting for years. When Olmert accuses Ben-Gvir and Smotrich of advancing a genocidal agenda and backing settler violence in the West Bank, he isn't speaking in hyperbole. According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, over 1,000 Palestinians have been killed in the occupied West Bank since October 2023, with armed settler attacks reaching record highs. Entire Palestinian farming communities, like those in Masafer Yatta and the South Hebron Hills, have been systematically displaced by armed settler militias operating under the explicit protection of state security forces. Olmert himself reaffirmed this in Haaretz, explicitly calling these actions an ongoing attempt at ethnic cleansing sponsored by state authorities. And when you look at Gaza, the International Court of Justice, ICJ, and the International Criminal Court, ICC, which issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, have repeatedly pointed to the exact genocidal statements made by ministers like Ben-Gvir as evidence of intent. Then you pivot to Ehud Barak's dissection of the Iran strategy, and the pattern of reckless deception becomes undeniable. Barak made a critical geopolitical point that every commentator needs to understand. In an asymmetric war, a regional power or non-state actor doesn't need to defeat a superpower in conventional terms. They just need to survive. Netanyahu sold Washington and Donald Trump on the arrogant premise that precision strikes would deliver absolute victory and cause the Iranian regime to instantly crumble. Instead, just like the United States experienced in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, Netanyahu dragged his country and his allies into an endless, muddy war of diminishing returns. Why? Because, as both Olmert and Barak point out, Netanyahu's ultimate priority isn't victory, security, or democracy. It's personal political survival. Facing ongoing corruption charges in Israeli courts and massive domestic outrage over the failure to protect citizens, Netanyahu has spent years trying to dismantle the Israeli Supreme Court and erode judicial independence just to keep himself out of prison. He uses foreign wars and far-right coalitions to shield himself from accountability at home. When critics call out these war crimes, state violence, and authoritarian moves, establishment outlets try to dismiss it as external hostility. But when two former Israeli prime ministers step up to call it genocide rhetoric, state-sponsored violence, strategic failure, and a coup against democracy, the narrative is officially broken. If you believe in holding power accountable, standing against war crimes, and cutting through foreign policy propaganda with verified facts, subscribe to The Honest Perspective right now. I'm Neel. Truth over access, people over profits. That's The Honest Perspective, and that's where I'll leave you.